Welcome to FCA again. You've probably been here long enough to have had that welcome message already more than once. My name is Denny Mullen. I'm retired Army and a volunteer with the local FCA chapter, which I joined in 1969. So I think I'm the oldest chapter member these days at 56 years in the chapter. So my claim to fame. I was a signal officer, so I had some training here locally in my time in the Army. So this session is almost got the title right up there. My phone crapped out on me. There we go. Transforming training across signal, cyber, EW, and public affairs. The change didn't make it to the slide, so I didn't make that announcement. Didn't want to leave anybody out of the panel for sure. So this is exciting. We got quite a panel set up. Just so a little bit understanding, when we get to questions, because the session is fully recorded, I'll run around and pass the mic out to audience questions and make sure we get them captured correctly. And then I'm not going to talk anymore and turn it over to our panel.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Appreciate it. Hey, so my name's Todd Boudreau, and I've got the honor today to be moderating a panel of 5 great soldiers and panel members. And so I'm going to open up with just a little bit of a statement, and then I'm going to introduce each one of them. When I introduce them, they'll have something to tell you. It'll kind of set where we're going, and then we'll move on from there, and hopefully we'll have some time for your questions as well. So I'm going to open with parts of a paper that a friend of mine, CW4 David Vaughn, a former 255 Sierra, now 170 Alpha cyber operations technician, put together in his capstone Warrant Officer PME class, because I think it captures where we're at well. The U.S. Army's Transformation Initiative, or ATI, launched under the Secretary of Defense's 2025 directive, is revolutionizing warfare through advanced technologies like AI-enabled command nodes, unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, and counter-UAS platforms. Transformation and contact involving units like 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team, 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and Special Forces Groups 1 and 5, drives rapid prototyping and soldier-driven innovation. Yet history warns that transformations falter without institutional knowledge, risking repeated integration errors and impractical technologies. ATI aims to create a leaner, more lethal force with 2.0 expanding experimentation across 2 divisions, 2 striker brigades, National Guard units, and other ABCTs and Special Forces groups. Technologies must meet TIC Technology Accelerator prioritization criteria, including technology readiness levels, or TRLs 5 through 7, manufacturing readiness levels, or MRLs 5+, in alignment with warfighter needs. Total Army analysis validates force structure and resource allocation, while force management integrates doctrine, organization, training, material, leadership, personnel, facilities, and policy, or .mil PFP, to deliver a cohesive capability. The challenges lie in integrating advanced systems without losing these hard-won lessons. When done well, training has historically ensured that new systems are operated and maintained through practical and effective means. Newly fielded, or in some cases issued, systems must drive ATI's 3 core efforts: delivering warfighter capabilities, optimizing force structure, and eliminating waste. Today's panel will address the demands of multi-domain operations, or MDO, and the rapidly evolving technology challenges that challenge training or create critical training gaps in the signal, cyber, electromagnetic warfare, and public affairs professions. This panel will explore how the Army is adapting institutional operational training to ensure soldiers maintain a decisive edge in a contested environment. We'll discuss innovative approaches to training, including possibly outcomes-based education, courseware as code, the Raven, formerly known as Catatumbo, and Future Signal Readiness Training to address the complexities of fielding and mastering cutting-edge equipment. And so now I'm going to go down one by one, introduce a panel member. When I introduce, if you've got some prepared statements to kind of set us forward, we'll do that. So right to my right, I'll just go right down the list. So first is Colonel John Hosey. He's the Army's 6th Chief of Cyber and Commandant of the U.S. Army Cyber School, headquartered in Fort Gordon, Georgia. Prior to joining the Cyber School, Colonel Hosey served as the Cyber Electromagnetic Warfare Officer for 5th Corps, U.S. Army Europe, Africa. In this position, he served as the Director of Security Cooperations, a key line of effort for 5th Corps and the European theater, overseeing interoperability across technical, procedural, and human domains, NATO schools, and for U.S. persons assigned to 5th Corps, and security force assistance across the area of Operation Victory. Sir, your opening.
I think probably two things that I want to say to you that to shape this conversation as far as like the cyber and EW piece, right? Well, more for the electromagnetic warfare piece is that just remember that EW moved to Fort Gordon only in like 2018 timeframe. You had the first privates graduate 17 Echo in 2020. I mean, we've made leaps and bounds. I'm honored to lead the team now that made leaps and bounds of over the past like 2 years before I got here, and over the past year, completely revamping 17 Echo education at the schoolhouse. So just remember that it's brand new, and that also that volatility doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, right? We've got so many things happening, transformation contact, Army Transformation Initiative, but guess what? We get to help shape that for the betterment and more lethality of the Army. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. To Colonel Hosey's right is Colonel Julia Donnelly. She serves as the 43rd Chief of Signal and Commandant of the U.S. Army Signal School, where she oversees more than 550 educators training approximately 11,000 students annually and represents a signal regiment of over 55,000 soldiers and 16,000 civilians worldwide. She commissioned out of George Washington University and has served the signal regiment for over 25 years from the tactical edge to the national strategic level, most recently as the commander of the 21st Signal Brigade. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everybody. So for those of you who were in the keynote this morning, you heard the challenge that's being given to our Army and for me, right, for the Signal Corps specifically, on how do we enable those capabilities across a whole spectrum of requirements and different technologies. This is not really a new challenge to the Signal Corps, truthfully. We've been reinventing ourselves for the last 160 years. So it's not something we're not used to, but it's just the next evolution in our ability to enable the warfighter to do command and control. So like Colonel Hosey said, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of change going on in our Army, but it is a huge opportunity. I'm very excited to be able to actually move forward and enable our individual signalers, the 25 uniforms, the Bravos, the PFCs, the captains, the warrant officers coming out of school across going out to every single edge of our Army to any kind of capability and being able to take this technology and make it work. So that's the challenge that we're faced with at the schoolhouse, and I'm excited to talk about it this morning. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, ma'am. To Colonel Donnelly's right is Colonel Stacy Hopward. She currently serves as the Commandant of the U.S. Army Public Affairs School and Director of the Army Proponent Office for Public Affairs. In this dual-headed position, she is responsible for the public affairs career field across all horizons of force modernization. Stacy has been a public affairs officer for more than 14 years, where she served at the brigade and division level, as well as on the joint staff. As a public affairs officer, she is deployed to Afghanistan and to Liberia. Ma'am?
Well, hey, good morning. It's very nice to be here, especially sitting next to some very well-accomplished teammates. Some of you may first be asking, like, why is PA sitting on this panel? And so I wanted to address that kind of elephant in the room, if I could, up front. And it can really be summed up in two words: information advantage, right? So in order for us to be our most effective, we have to be integrated and nested and synchronized and all those words that say that we do things together well. when you look at information advantage and the five activities, right? So enable, protect, inform, influence, and attack. Each of us have very robust pieces of that, and together is how we will actually get after creating that advantage that's needed. So then you may say, well, why this particular panel? And it has a lot to do with the training piece, right? The ability to train collaboratively and collectively, our ability to understand how technology is changing all of the time. Inside of the public affairs space, obviously, we're fighting for that cognitive space. And it's really important to have the right technologies in order to get those messages to the right places. I can write the best message, we can take the best photo. If I can't get it anywhere, it doesn't matter. So my teammates to the left and right of me are extremely important to our success. Now, it does say my title is Commandant of USAPAS. In full transparency, USAPAS does not exist yet. It will stand up 1 October. For those who might be familiar with our other school, the Defense Information School, that will still exist. A lot of complexities and relationships there that we're still working out. But I'm happy to be the one that sets the standard for Army training when it comes to public affairs, and look forward to talking about that today.
Thank you, ma'am. Next is Lieutenant Colonel Elvin Fortuna, who is the Director of Army's University's Technologies Innovation Group, as well as a doctoral student in Michigan State University's Educational Psychology and Educational Technology program. His work focuses on the integration of technologies in educational contexts to improve the development and delivery of world-class professional military education. Sir?
Good morning, team. Colonel Fortuna here. I'm going to take the full 5 minutes. I prepare my statements. But hopefully this is useful to you. As Todd mentioned, thanks for having me on this panel. I'm the director of the Technology Innovations Group at Army University, getting my doctorate done in Ed Psych and Ed Tech. I see the issues that we're discussing in this panel from a slightly different lens. So I'm looking at this from both a military and an academic lens, particularly through the lens of professional military education. On the flight over, I read an interesting article, the class of 2026. So the point of the article was this: college graduates next year will have completed all 4 years of their undergraduate education with ChatGPT 3.5 or better, or other large language models at the palm of their hand. They're using it often for every academic task imaginable. This holds true also for your high schoolers. So it made me really think and reflect, right? The same thing is true of our officer corps, our non-commissioned officers, our warrant officers, our soldiers. They used it before there was policy that restricted or encouraged its use. They use it on their phones, at work. Early adopters have been using this for about 3 years now, but we're moving beyond exploratory use cases and into more systematic integrations and innovations. The questions now are, what is the impact? In what ways are these technologies best used in the operational, institution, and self-development domains? And what does the proliferation of complicated technologies for use in ill-structured environments mean for how soldiers learn, particularly about the problems of warfare? It's interesting to me to note that as an educational technologist, these technologies were developed without education in mind. Unlike learning management systems, intelligent tutoring systems, computer-based instruction, these large language models or their visual and multimodal cousins were never intended for learning, but they've had quite the impact. My work focuses, like I said, on PME, particularly curriculum developers and instructors and students, and how they can best integrate these complicated technologies, such as but not limited to large language models, into their educational workflows. I'll talk very briefly about one group that I've talked about pretty frequently and work with, which is curriculum developers. Curriculum developers generally in 3 camps. First, they're avid users of Gen AI. They use clever prompt engineering, basic text mining, and they have improved their productivity tenfold in creating learning materials. What they're doing is distributing their work to these technologies and focusing their cognitive energy on what they do best and applying their expertise judiciously. On the other side are the techno-skeptics. They will not touch these technologies. They have concerns about privacy and security, and they sense that these generative tools cannot expertly do what they do, integrating learning science, human creativity, human experience. They see themselves as experts, and they see what they do as an art, and they won't offload that work. But the vast majority of curriculum developers I've worked with follow a middle way. They know there are powerful technologies out there, they're excited to use them, but they don't know exactly how. Unlike linear technologies of the past, LLMs don't have a clear instruction manual. They're probabilistic rather than deterministic, and to the layperson, these technologies can be intimidating. There's no user manual that is sufficient for what ultimately requires a wholly different approach to thinking about what a computer can do. The pattern with curriculum developers holds for both students, instructors, faculty, administrators, and leadership. They don't know exactly how to approach this. So I've settled on this explanation for now. The wave of technologies, this new wave of technologies requires a different mode of thinking. It's not about programming, it's not about a procedure, it's not about memorizing facts. Those are necessary, those are good, but they're not the thing. So what is the thing? An oldie but goodie, critical thinking, perhaps critical and creative thinking, perhaps systems thinking, maybe just plain old clear thinking. Regardless, understanding the nature and capabilities of these systems and those coming to be is what's critical. The same mode of thinking that helped us master the simple and complex technologies of the past may be antithetical to the mode of thinking that is required in the complicated, or as I like to say, ill-structured world we live in and in which these technologies reside. So I'm hopeful that we together can facilitate the learning and education that the future force needs to fight its next war. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, bookending the other side, a good partner and a plank holder in the cyber school as well. We have Sergeant Major Jesse Potter. He assumed duties as the Deputy Commanding General for Operations G3 Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Cyber Command on March 11 of 2024. Originally a New York native, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in January of 1994, completing one-station unit training as a chemical operations specialist. Later, he classified into electronic warfare in 2009, and then into cyber operations in 2015. Sergeant Major?
Good morning. So I'm honored to be here, join the other esteemed members of our panel, and look forward to a robust discussion. I actually took a couple of notes because there's two key points that I want to capture. So many of you are probably wondering what me as the G3 Sergeant Major of Army Cyber has to do with transforming training. It's pretty easy to understand the role of the commandants here and CAC and training, but how does the operational command fit into that essential mix? So when we don't know something, what do we always refer to? Or what should we refer to? So what does doctrine say? So actually we do have it and we still do use it occasionally. But doctrinally, there are three developmental domains, and I'm looking around the room and some of you are nodding your head. Institutional, operational, and self-development. So I'm actually here covering the operational developmental domain. So because what is unique to the cyber mission force is the joint training across United States Cyber Command. It doesn't matter if you're an airman, a sailor, a Marine, a soldier, or a guardian. Yes, there are guardians. We train exactly the same. And most of our training is in addition to the service feeder foundational training that's provided by the United States Army Cyber School. We specifically train 2,000 level training across Army Cyber. And the training ranges anywhere between 3 to 18 additional months, depending on the work role, at upwards to a cost of over $350,000 a training seat, whether the soldier graduates or not. We pay for that seat, whether they only sit in that seat for 1 day or 18 months. Additionally, what is also not widely understood is that we have the responsibility to train for the employment of capabilities that are developed in-house by our cyber capability developers that are employed on our operational platform. Unlike some of our traditional forces where our capabilities are delivered by our ACOMs and our programs of record, and they come with net NEF training capabilities, we have to train our operators and our exploitation analysts how to actually employ the capability that they're going to employ on their operational network, usually by the person who actually wrote the code to actually develop that actual capability. So the training that we have is a little bit unique across our operational domain, but we would not be able to do it without the service feeder training that's provided by our fellow commandants sitting here at the table.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. You might want to keep your mic hot. I'm going to start at that end and come back this way. So I'm going to put a couple of paradigms up, and from that, I want to get the reflections of the non-commandants thinking of your time in the military and your experiences. And then commandants, you're in unique positions right now where not only can you reflect on that, but you can make a change to how it's happening. And so the first paradigm I want us to think through is thinking in terms of complex and complicated work. And so if we think of complex and complicated work, and then we look at the tasks, some tasks are very simple. They're easily repeatable, easily trained, and if repeated regularly, they're easily retained. And so I think of in 1983 when I went to basic training and my individual weapon did not perform properly, I did this thing called sports. And if you talk to any of the privates on Fort Gordon, they're doing that same thing because it is a very finite set of problems that would come up, and we want a very structured way for them to address that. Complicated tasks are multi-step, but solvable with expertise or helps. They can be trained to retain, normally with checklists. And so, beginning with Sergeant Major Potter, what readiness challenges have you witnessed that are created or exacerbated by fielding complicated equipment to lower echelon units?
So I'll take this from the initial perspective. So having been in both Iraq and Afghanistan and fielding some prototype off-the-shelf COT system, which many of us in this room have done, I think the biggest readiness challenge we have is not the initial fielding, and it's not the net and F from the training perspective. Because we'll train it and it's very robust, it's usually provided with that training, but what was never built in the past is the sustainment of that actual training within the formation to be able, because it wasn't concerned about who got the equipment and what training they got when they got the equipment. It was the person who followed behind them that actually received the equipment and only had to go off of the manual or the other pieces. And we didn't have, it wasn't institutionalized in our training environment because we always looked to train the piece of equipment. Furthermore, when we started talking about our COTS pieces of equipment, was understanding the training aspect of this is how you employ the capability. There are many things you can do with it. How do you actually utilize the piece of equipment for other things than it was intended? And so that's where it really diverges from a readiness perspective, is when you use the piece of equipment. I'll use case in point in Afghanistan when we used a Duke system that eventually became Sabre Fury that we had an unlocked load set on that I turned into a 50-watt electronic attack capability that I could use with an antenna. That was a phenomenal piece of equipment that we used to great effect, but there was no training set to be able to hand that off and the lessons learned when we departed and the next group of individuals fell in on the equipment.
Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Fortuna?
I'll give you a different use case. So I'll talk specifically about Gen AI and large language models as a general purpose technology, and I'll also be platform agnostic. So I've seen the deployment of various platforms that host LLMs, some with very powerful capabilities available across the force. One challenge that I've seen with general purpose technologies such as this is that unlike a weapon system that has a clear purpose and well-defined capabilities, these technologies bring capabilities that we don't fully understand yet. This is a readiness challenge in that the use cases actually need to be developed after the technology is available. Upskilling needs to happen not just for a few technical experts, but every individual in the formation that could possibly benefit. Say, for example, tomorrow everyone gets access to a world-class large language model that's multi-agentic with a near unlimited context window. Who is that for? What does that do? How much time is it going to take to get a return on investment? And really, what does new equipment training even look like for a technology that is this unwieldy and unstructured? Secondly, if time is a problem in the educational space, doubly or triply so in the operation units where time is a premium. So educating soldiers on what ultimately is a literacy as opposed to a skill is a challenge. And I'll unpack that real quick. You know, we're not talking about 1 hour class or fielding, but rather something that's lifelong and needs to be developed over time. You're not gonna get that in a fielding. You're gonna get that with repeated use over time in different contexts and variety. So, thank you.
Colonel Hopwood.
Yeah, if I could just build on his repeated use over time. I mean, if you adhere to adult learning theory, you understand that adults learn most by doing, by experiencing. So we actually have colloquially said more reps and sets equals a better PAO. So the earlier I bring them in to the career field, the more often they will get exposed to different events that will require them to be able to respond. So just to feed a little bit on that. And the challenge becomes, how do you train that from an institutional perspective before they go into the operational side? And really, we focus on two very simple things that are much more difficult. Why and what for? So why is it that you need to communicate something specifically? Why do you need to use that piece of equipment? Why do you want to use that piece of software? If they don't understand the why, then they don't understand how to apply the what for. Like, for what end is it that you are applying this particular tool? I can give plenty of examples. As social media has continued to evolve over time, the schoolhouses frequently want to train a particular software, a particular social media platform. And that doesn't help, because that moves rapidly and changes. So I can teach you Facebook, which we did 15 years ago, right? We don't teach Facebook now, because that's not where a lot of the audience is. However, commanders in the field, so to the operational side, still want someone who can do the multitude of platforms. This becomes a challenge. So this is why we focus on the why and what for, and really having that well defined before you can go into determining which types of softwares or platforms or equipment. And it just allows them to be much more agile in operation.
Thank you. Colonel Donnelly.
So several different readiness challenges when it comes to the modernization of the Signal Corps and the modernization of C2. And so I can go probably a couple different ways on this, but we'll start with one. I'm sure we'll get to the other one. Is that when we were looking at JRTC, you heard 101st talk about this morning some of their learning engagements that they had with their new equipment. And so the lessons that we learned when we went to actually visit JRTC and see the soldiers is that the ones who had come out of the schoolhouse, who were trained on specific types of equipment, WinT, here at Fort Gordon, when they got to 101st and they were given something different that didn't look like what they had trained on, they really didn't even know where to start. And so that was a challenge, because when they called for help to Chief, they weren't even able to say, this is what I'm seeing, and so I need help with this troubleshooting step. They weren't really even able to describe what they were seeing. That's a huge readiness challenge, right? Like, that is an indictment on me, on the Signal School, on the CCOE. How do we improve that? So that's really one of our main tasks that we're kind of taking on. And we've said this many times before, and we've all heard this, is going back to basics. In this particular case, for us, it's about going back to explaining what signal flow is, what signal theory is, what the OSI model is, what piece of equipment you may be looking at, and where it fits into the bigger picture. And so we've actually implemented a basic communicator module at the schoolhouse. The Charter 25 Bravo is basically explaining some of those basics so that they can understand where they fit into the bigger picture. We do intend to expand that going forward. And actually, we're looking right now at the 25 hotels and a series of their critical tasks. When we realized that at the beginning of how you develop POI, you have to know what tasks they're going to train to. And so for the 25 hotels in particular, all of those tasks are really just rooted in WinT. And so we are going to have to flip almost every single task and go back to, this is a router, this is a switch, this is transport, this is SATCOM, these are waveforms, and explain it in that manner so that the soldiers, when they go out to their units, they're not looking for an SDT. They're looking for some sort of satellite transport. They're looking for whatever their baseband is, and they understand those basics. That's one of the ways we're trying to get after that. But it is a huge readiness challenge.
Colonel Hosey.
Yeah, so talking about complex and complicated, right? So Specialist Hosey in 1995 was calculating fire missions with the FATIDS BCS, right? Which is a complicated task, but you do it in a checklist, right? There's no other way to calculate a fire mission than utilizing either the system or the TFT, the temperature firing tables. Nowadays, though, I mean, you heard it if you were listening to the panel before this, or you heard it when you were listening to the 101st, you're dealing with the speed of tech, software-defined radios, and an ever-changing battlefield that we obviously see every day, open source, watching Ukraine against Russia, right? So I think in the schoolhouse from the get-go, from the instantiation, they've always had an outcomes-based learning model that creates creative, just like Sergeant Major Potter down there, creates creative free thinkers that are scoped by commander's intent, right? We meet the intent of what the commander wants. And I think ultimately as we shape the schoolhouse and the learning methodologies as we go forward, especially with the new technology that's out there, whether it's new learning management systems, generative AI, large language models built into the curriculum. I think it's, again, as exciting times that we're allowed to do that, and we can make our forces more operationally relevant and interactive with operational forces to ensure that those soldiers that we present are more operationally relevant. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So now I want to open the scope up a little bit more. So again, simple tasks are easy and repeatable. Complicated tasks are multi-step, but are solvable. And so if we look at the simple, complex, and complicated conundrum, and so what I mean by that is a sundial is used to tell time, and it's relatively a simple piece of equipment. A Swiss watch is used to tell time. Most are complex pieces of equipment. But knowing when to time the convergence of multi-domain effects on a modern battlefield in the volume, velocity, and violence of large-scale combat operations becomes very complicated. Thinking through that complexity through the various ways that you can do training, I know we talked outcomes-based and Bloom's taxonomy, but even looking at some of the PME courses, and I like the way this flows. I'm going to start with Sergeant Major again. Sergeant Major, what have you seen in past assignments as the modern battlefield grows increasingly complicated, and then applying our soldiers in that environment?
So what I'm going to start with is we've seen the proliferation of low-cost technologies. So let's have an honest conversation, okay? $450 digi-quadcopter with a $100 RK-3 hand grenade has the same effect against a T-72 as a $200,000 Hellfire and $1 million Grad Eagle. So we've seen it across the updates of the modern battlefield, the proliferation of low-cost technologies. But the difficulty is, and we even talked about it in some of the ways that we currently train our soldiers to be able to adapt to them. We do it specifically from a task-based approach, right? We have task as a standard, and that's the way that we've trained our formations for days. But as the technology advances, and especially within the example I used, the proliferation of low cost, our soldiers have to be adaptive in the way that they're trained, specifically in a knowledge, skills, abilities-based outcome. Because I don't care if you follow a checklist to be able to achieve an effect, especially today. I just need you to have the knowledge and the skills to be able to figure out you've got to go to point A to point B. I don't care how you get there. I don't care whatever you use to be able to achieve the effect, you just achieve the outcome at the end. And I think as we see the changes in the modern battlefield, especially with the implementation of AI and some of our low-cost proliferation, I think that change in how we approach our training is going to be critical versus the more traditional way of do A, then B, then C, and you get an outcome.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Sergeant Major. And I'll piggyback off it a little bit. I think of simple, complex, and ill-structured. So I think the two terms will be interchangeable for me. That's because I hear my advisor, Dr. Spiro at Michigan State, poking me in the brain a little bit. He says ill-structured, so we're going to go with that. But I think we're pointing about the same thing. So the classroom tends to be well-structured. Life tends to be ill-structured, right? Everything is context-dependent, changing, contingent, right? In many ways, war has always been ill-structured. You can ask Clausewitz about the nature of war, but the character of war in these modern times is unique. So what I've seen, particularly at CTCs, and from those coming from CTCs, the decision-making cycle increasing exponentially, particularly for the staff, and that's from battalion up to the corps level, which is what I've personally seen. The modern battlefield is just overwhelmed with noise and information. The volume of information the modern staff receives in 2025 is pretty crazy. They have to receive all that information, filter it, verify it, synthesize it, analyze it, try to get into that OODA loop, right? And it will make Clausewitz spin. I would say these technologies are interesting in that the generation of the volume of text and the volume of audio, images, video is only going to make the modern staff's decision cycle even more frenetic. What's interesting about these technologies, though, is they are both the cause of the problem and possibly a solution. So that same technology can generate it and synthesize it and give it to you quicker. And so I'm curious to see how this all develops as we develop the force.
So for the commandants, same type of question, but I give you a little bit more. So think not only in your schoolhouse, but as leaders within your branches, how you're changing the environment to prepare soldiers to deal with the complicated on the modern battlefield.
Yeah, so I think it first starts with a few foundations, right? So we've talked about a few of them here. So it is really understanding like the why for what you're doing. Also having the basic knowledge, right, that requires you to be able to do your function, which means understanding the basic theories of your functions, as well as the ability to adapt. So when putting that together, right, you kind of get this fuller picture of like, okay, this is what I want to achieve, and here's the basics I need to get from point A to point B, knowing that in between there, anything can happen. That's true for PA every single day, right? I mean, our communications model that we all learn probably in Army 101 really focuses on that like sender receiver, and we pretend that you can go sender to receiver and it's easy, that there's no complications in between. Real life has taught us, and theory evolved to really understand just how complicated that actually is because of all the things in between. One of the things that we did for training is set a baseline, and I think this is where I think we're a little unique, is a lot of ours is not exactly as technical as maybe some of my peers is here, because we're dealing with inside of like behavioral sciences and studies. So I really focus on like no checklists. So for our officers, they are not allowed to receive a checklist until they have submitted at least an initial thought, idea, design of a particular assignment. Because what I wanted them to learn was that there's no right answer, there certainly is a wrong answer, but when restricting them to a checklist, what it did was stifle their creativity, their ability to think differently about how they might want to communicate the message or what medium might be best. We wanted to go as far as bringing them into like a simulated office on day one, assigning them to roles, and then rotating them through. So almost like a guided OJT as a part of the qualification course. And what we found to be most difficult when thinking through that type of solution was really the instructors. It was the old heads or the grayed beards or whatever we're calling us more mature people in the career fields these days, who were getting in the way of our ability to do that, because there was plenty of people who just had a lot of knowledge that they wanted to share, you know, that sage on the stage. So what we did was instead we deliberately did a hybrid with a solid amount of instruction that's student-led and then moving it into experience space. And then the last thing I'll say is really cultivating their curiosity. From day one, I told them to harness their inner 3-year-old. I want them to ask their instructors why. And then I want them to ask why again. And then I want them to ask why again until you get to the core of why it is that you're being told or asked to do something a particular way. Certainly I had to prepare my instructors for that, because they were not quite ready to be asked so many times by a more junior person or a less experienced person. But it also forced the instructors to then think about the why, get in touch with that, so that way they could impart that knowledge in a more meaningful way.
Donnelly?
Yeah, so I'll kind of piggyback a little bit on the curiosity element of things. So as we were looking to branch last year, new lieutenants into the Army, both from West Point, from RTC, we always look at kind of what are the key elements we're looking for in officers. And it's funny, when I went and got the back brief on how we did last year, I was told that Signal is really schizophrenic, that we change what we're looking for every single year. We go back and forth between technicians with hard double E kind of computer science degrees versus the free thinker, right? And the one with a history degree or international affairs. And I'm one of the ones who flipped it this year. I went back, I was looking for problem solvers. And so when we talked to the cadets this summer, cadet summer training, they asked me, what's the one thing that you're looking for in a Signal leader? And I said, I really need you to solve problems because I can't give you the checklist, right? I can't even tell you what you're going to walk into. And I explained this to the lieutenants. I mean, I feel a little bit bad, but I want to be honest with them that the schoolhouse has not prepared you for every single thing that you're going to see. It hasn't even prepared you for most of the things that you're going to see. But hopefully we provided you the tools to be able to go out there and solve the problem. We picked you because you're a problem solver. We picked you because you're a free thinker. We have an open mind. We've given you elements of the basics, like I talked about, understanding what the basics of signal flow is and signal theory. And then I need you to go out there and solve problems. On top of that, I also need you to be a teammate. And so in the Signal Corps, we have the distant end theory, where it's not going to work if you are continuously blaming the other guy. So as long as the two of you work together, you can bring it in. And so hopefully in this way, we're able to set them up so that they can move into what is an extremely complicated network today of Next-Gen C2. Like that is, we heard this morning about the simplicity of a smartphone, and you can hand it to a 5-year-old and they can make it work. Well, that's great, but it is not 5-year-olds who are running that network, right? It is extremely talented, very well paid in many cases, commercial industry that's providing that network. And so for us to be able to do that, I have to have a very highly talented, educated, free-thinking, capable cohort of Signal Corps to be able to provide that and make that very complicated network work so that it is very simple at the edge, which is our goal.
Yeah, before I pass it to Colonel Hosey, I got the picture in my mind. I won't say what the wireless provider used to provide it, but there was a commercial where they had a user and behind them was a sea of people that represented that service provider. Well, that's the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Yes, Colonel Hosey.
So I'm going to answer this one with two different hats on, right? One for the cyberspace operations piece. We're trying to create and provide soldiers, officers, every cohort, enlisted, warrant officer. Again, it goes back to the creative free thinker that meets the commander's intent, right? I was honored at one time to be part of the team that developed like the DCO gunnery tables. So how many different ways can you accomplish a task when you're maneuvering through cyberspace? There's no way in any shape, form, or fashion could we train every one of those tasks to that capability in the cyber school. So hence the reason why we have to do outcomes-based education internal to that field. Now you're bringing over, with my EW, Electromagnetic Warfare hat on, right? We're 20 years behind. We just brought it over to Fort Gordon in 2018. We just graduated the first AIT class in 2020. We just being fielded, oh, by the way, the first program of record to the schoolhouse next month. So we've had to have outcomes-based education for electromagnetic warfare. There's one anecdotal story that somebody on this panel has told me about a couple of times, where we had a graduate of the cyber school head out to their unit. They called back and complained that they never learned about the piece of kit that they just saw at their unit. It took me 2 days to learn how to do this, use this piece of kit in the capacity. And then that person turned around and said, that's awesome. That means it's a win. It only took you 2 days and not like 2 weeks to learn that piece of equipment. That's the whole reason why the cyber school is established that way, as well as being transparent and auditable to allow operational forces to look at what we train at the schoolhouse and then able to provide inputs to the schoolhouse. Of course, we have to audit it through the process, but then we're training operationally relevant education more or quicker in a more rapid fashion of the way we do it. Thanks.
Thank you. I got one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience. But what I want my panel members to do is close your eyes. No one's going to do anything weird. But I want you to picture something. I want you to picture in your mind a Mack truck arrives at a village accustomed to horse-drawn carts and buggies. He's laden with new vehicles. The driver in coveralls, a greasy Mack hat, waves to the village leader who's approaching in a horse-drawn cart. In the distance, you see villagers going about their daily lives using carts pulled by horses to transport goods. Now, picture this: on a return trip, the trucker is astonished to find that the village is transformed. The people are now using their horses to pull the cars. The village leader waves from a new car still being drawn by a horse, while in the distance, villagers continue to transport their belongings, food, furniture, packages, in horse-drawn cars. You can open your eyes. The picture in your mind can be labeled as tech abuse, which happens when new equipment is fielded into an older system without considering existing infrastructure processes or the fundamental ways that things are done. It demonstrates technology being applied without the understanding of the context, resulting in a comical yet ultimately inefficient adaptation that negates the intended benefit of the new technology. The village didn't need cars, they needed a better way to transport. Simply adding a new component to an outdated method created a more complex and arguably less effective solution. So again, beginning at the end, I'd like to start with Sergeant Major and Lieutenant Colonel Fortuna. What have you seen in past assignments as new equipment was introduced into legacy systems and processes where if left on its own, it could have devolved, but where soldiers came together and made it work?
So I actually got a kick out of this one. Biggest problem I would say is letting go of the past. I'm going to use an example that every service member in this room can relate to. The war on cover sheets. Yep, I hear you laughing. There's a whole Facebook page all dedicated to the war on cover sheets. And why? We feel that now I'm not an HR professional, but I'm using that as an example of exactly why we can't let go of the past. We feel that a multi-million, it's probably a B, but probably multi-million-dollar HR system that we have been asking for my entire time I've been in the Army to get something that actually works, right? But instead, what do? Leaders go right back to where they are comfortable. Well, I need this, I need this, I need this. The fact that an award is done in that system and it's done completely automated with no other piece, I don't need any other information. Everything I need about that soldier is in that system. I just have to click a couple of buttons and find it. But no, I want an actual hard copy of this PDF that's uploaded into this document to do these things. So I'm going to go all the way back to General Janovic's point. You know, leaders don't have good ideas. He used a different thing, and I'm not going to say that because I'm not going to disparage under general officers. But leaders don't have new ideas. Soldiers do. Junior leaders have new ideas. And the problem is that I look at it this way. We have to get out of the way with the remnants of the past and be able to figure out how to integrate the capability that they helped design and develop, but with our operational experience of how to maximize its capability, because that's what the leaders have. But the problem is we have to get out of our own way sometimes to be able to do that.
I'm thinking of your analogy, and I'm wondering if the villagers got any education or training before they got those cars. So that's why they're pulling them, perhaps. Anyways, what I've seen, a lack of interoperability has really dampened a lot of the integrations that we wanted, at least in the institutional domain. The legacy systems we built, we paid for, that we have, were closed systems built for a well-defined problem, and they solve that problem very well. So in comes the data science revolution and the machine learning thing. We want all your data. Great. In comes the generative and predictive AI. We need all that data too from your legacy systems. Great. Okay, let me get that data. You know, is it in a common format? Is it shareable across platforms? Where's the documentation for the API? Oh wait, there's no API. Like those things. This is not interoperable. At least in the institutional domain, the systems that I'm specifically talking about. The organizational processes are also, as Sergeant Major kind of points out, industrial age, the old setup. They're stovepipe, a bit hierarchical. And that setup and those processes run counter to the thinking needed to leverage powerful and general purpose technologies, such as LLMs. So for a legacy system, you have your admins, your experts, your power users, your developers, and all the rest. That setup may not work when it comes to complicated systems. And I'm going to try to give you a specific example here. So for example, with curriculum developers, they'll generally contact the data scientists or the platform developers. I've seen this with AITC. You know, the subject matter expert is trying to talk to the developer that runs the platform. Those personnel can help in a lot of great ways to make sure the platform is running. They'll give you some general advice, but the knowledge that they're looking for isn't with the tech support chain, right? The knowledge isn't centralized at all. It's distributed. So there's no help desk for a curriculum developer using an IO5 rated LLM to create lesson plans and supporting materials, right? That information, that knowledge is both resonant with the technical expert, the domain expert, and across the organization. And so we have to adjust our processes for the reality that expertise is going to be distributed across technologies and people. So.
Excellent. Now, for the commandants, I want to prime your pump a little bit more, because you are in a position right now where our Army is arguably making the largest change it has maybe ever. General Rainey in a Control-Alt Defense interview just basically said, probably bigger than going from going to an all-volunteer service right after Vietnam. You've got the Chief of Staff of the Army who is focused on how we solve these problems. So with the current opportunities that are presented by our commanders, by our chiefs, by the secretary, tell me how you're going to take advantage of the opportunities that you have to not allow this to happen.
So I'd like to see more shared resources from the standpoint of there is a camera on so many pieces of equipment today. I don't need to send a soldier out to go take a particular type of photo unless we need something very specific, but that should be in rare instances. I should be able to pull the footage from those camera systems and be able to use that for strategic messaging. If I could do that, there'd be a bigger wide body of imagery from which I can select from. I could also get it in probably near real time versus having to wait for the process. And then I would be able to send better messaging, right? Like I'd be able to support senior leaders better when they want to see something or say something. I didn't mean that in the other way. I also really would like to outline that we have this tech abuse challenge right now today and have had in public affairs for a very long time, whether that is commanders who say they want a particular social media platform with no real purpose. They just like, I want one, right? They don't even have somebody to manage it, but they just want one. So if you're a commander in the room, don't just want it to want it, have a reason for it. And then really from a equipment standpoint, PAs and visual information soldiers like to get the best tech in order to stay up with camera kit systems, software, so on and so forth. They don't do the interconnectedness to make sure that they can then put that piece of equipment onto some type of network in order to get information from one piece to another in order to use it. So that's a challenge we have today. It's a challenge we had yesterday, and it's a challenge that I'm hoping to solve as we move into the future and this zero trust environment and all the other G6 things I don't really understand, but I'm asking lots of questions about.
Thank you. Colonel Donnelly, you're living this.
And that we will do our best to answer the question. that was just kind of my point, so thank you for making it. No, I'll start with saying I was in a conference a little bit less than a year ago, and I just come from several data literacy courses and talking about like how we can improve data literacy of the Signal Corps, how can we improve data literacy of the Army in this data-centric Army of ours. And there was a general officer who has since retired, who said to the room, and he was a senior in the room, we don't need to know the question, we just need to gather the data. And so this gets to your point of that is somebody who doesn't understand how data works, and is clearly leading the Army perhaps in not the correct direction. And so that fortunately, like I said, the person has retired, and I think that the newer generations understand this better. They understand the purposes of data, they understand how to use it, they understand that you need to know the question first before you can even structure it. So I think it's explaining that to the new generation that how we use this, and it's not just about the signal core. So the other side of this is breaking down the stovepipes. The domains are not just domains in amongst themselves, right? Like it's not just the signal core who's building the network and for ourselves, right? Or just doing it and then handing it off to somebody. You need to work with your G2, your G6, the G3, like we heard earlier on the previous panel, of having that shared understanding of how this is supposed to work, what you're looking for, and how we can help enable you. Like, I think this is a common problem. This is not anything new, but the tools have made it so relevant that we really need to work together on how to educate the whole force and not just have, hey, just SIGO, go show me how the data works and I'll come up with a better decision. Like, that's not how this works. We have to educate across all domains.
Colonel Hosey?
I think the one message that I would have to give, I think, going out of this, as far as like informing the larger group, right, is that for the past former 20 years, so we got out of Afghanistan, we were in coin operations. So for electromagnetic warfare, what was the apogee of skill used during that time frame, right? I was a battery commander. I had 20 Dukes and one Warlock system. I pushed a button, everything started emitting, and I couldn't talk to the third truck behind me, right? So I've sat in also through several iterations of summits that where currently some leaders in the Army think that that is still the apogee of skill in electromagnetic warfare. Push button, high power, barrage jamming, which is not the case. I mean, most of us in this room understand that there's an exquisite gradation from high power, push button barrage jamming, all the way through to potentially even RF enabled cyber, right? So there is that presentation of effect that you can have during the fires process, not just, hey, we're gonna jam everything and not be able to communicate. Thank you.
Sure. Do we have time for any questions? I think we got a little bit of time.
I always have the random obligatory question, but Colonel Donnelly, you talked about the building a generation and focusing on the creative free thinkers. How in the schoolhouse, especially at our leaders levels, at our E6s, at our lieutenants, at our captains, are we incorporating scenario-based problem solving into the future technicians that we're trying to create?
So I'll just give you one example. We recently implemented a electromagnetic spectrum and EW kind of viewpoint within CCC towards the end of the course. And maybe we should do it a little bit earlier, but I'll tell you that the class that I recently was the gold mentor for, their eyes were opened on that day when they realized that everything that they had learned up to that point of how to make the network run, and then they were shown what their footprint looked like. And just, you could literally see the light bulbs going off in the room, like, oh my gosh, like I need to understand how all this works and how it fits into the bigger picture and how I can inform my commander that, yeah, sure, you want this exquisite capability all the time, but if you're gonna get that exquisite capability all the time, this is what you look like to the enemy. And so trying to get them to be able to have that seat at the table with the commander and say, yeah, explain that and help inform, I think is huge. And it's been a great success for us so far.
I have to make one comment.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, Colonel Donnelly, you might have kind of hit on it with the comment that you just made, but is there any effort to try to like integrate all of the schoolhouses across Fort Gordon and maybe even bringing in public affairs to really kind of have all of the students together to be in that like information advantage environment, or is that too big of a fish to fry?
Yeah, so I'll take that from a different perspective. It sounds awesome. And I will tell you, in the cyber school, we made a valiant attempt. In fact, if you look to some of our very first briefing slides, we aligned AIT and BOLIC and all of those classes, they were right justified, which blew everyone's mind because it was so that we could get them all to graduate and they would do like a capstone or something. And then you find out you've got odds numbers of different ones and it doesn't align and life happens. It is very, very difficult. I think where we could do something like that though is as technology is coming on where you can have that what they call it, VR type devices. And so where you could have another branch provide help for how they're operating in a talk or the types of questions that they're going to ask, which then would then solicit responses. So I think we're on the cusp of seeing where AI can be trained at another branch, and those individuals, because normally you're not in a talk, they're calling you, you're getting an email, and they could give all of those demand signals as if they're there.
So great. I got to make one comment because everything I've heard here, I'm the old Vietnam era guy, right? So a couple of things I heard which make me feel really well. A little bit of a story. My father and I had regularly had this discussion. I spent 5 years in Europe in the Cold War era, and he was never ever concerned about us having a problem with the Russians on the ground. And he was a tail gunner in B-17, a burning one, bailed out. He and the belly gunner together, escape an invasion, managed to find their way east, cross the Danube River, and ended up with the Russian army. And spent, I don't know how long with the Russian army. But one of the comments he always told me in the discussions we had about me spending time in Europe in the Cold War was not to worry about them because they weren't problem solvers. If something broke on a truck, which he told me several stories, the driver of the truck had no idea how to fix his Russian truck. So my dad, an old farm boy, and his good buddy, electronics technician from Boston, together would fix the truck and get him back on the road. And it was interesting. So in my experience, Desert Storm time frame, we actually literally threw out Cisco IP phones and bolted them in the back of vehicles. And soldiers hadn't seen those before. They had to figure out how to make them work on the battlefield. The leadership had to figure out how to do numbering plans that fit with this. So there was, it got solved on the battlefield. And so I think what I've heard today, though, is we're training our soldiers to be problem solvers and problem thinkers. That implies that training is fundamentals. It's really fundamentals. Power equals E times I, right? I mean, so that's really important. That's my message I got out of today. I didn't want to speak for the audience for sure, but it really reminded me of that, what we're doing. That's a positive thing.
Sir, I got one parting question for any of the panel, but it's talks on what Sergeant Major, I don't know if this thing is working, Sergeant Major Potter was talking about. When is the rest of the Army going to get on board with how we're doing outcomes-based training? Because it's based on, we're bringing in self-learners into an institution and putting them out in operational force. Outcomes-based training is successful here, but being an old tanker, we're seeing it's not happening the rest. How long do you think that's going to take?
So I'll hit that as we close because I know we're over time. So there is a DoD instruction that drives the Defense Department to go towards outcomes-based. The legacy ship behind us, the Chief of Staff of the Army is like, burn it, we're moving forward. We're not gonna rest on any of those things. And so this is my solicitation to you, and I'll do this, I'll be so bold for the other schools as well. Be a part of what we're doing, right? If we're sending you soldiers and you think that they're off, you can talk about us if you please talk to us, right? Give us a shot. We're the tail, we don't wag the dog. You tell us what you need, and if you're not getting it, we're ready to rapidly evolve and make that happen. So please be in partnership with us. We appreciate your time here and all that you do. Thank you.